I'm Arthur. I'm 34 years old, and I watched my cousin, a man who had been handed a multimillion-dollar life on a silver platter, have a complete and total meltdown at the Thanksgiving dinner table when he found out I was secretly worth $10 million. Before I tell you about the screaming, the shattered plates, and the one sentence from my father that silenced the entire room, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far a story can travel. The air in my Uncle Richard's dining room was thick enough to cut with a knife. It always was. Thick with the smell of roasted turkey and sage stuffing, yes, but also with the suffocating scent of old money and unspoken judgments. Their dining room wasn't just a room. It was a theater for their wealth. A long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine reflected the light from a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than my first car. On the walls, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors stared down, their gazes a constant reminder that you were in their domain, playing by their rules. I tried to make myself small in the oversized, throne-like chair they assigned me. My goal for the evening was simple: survive. Survive the syrupy, backhanded compliments from my Aunt Carol. Survive the smug, self-congratulatory monologues from my Uncle Richard. And most of all, survive my cousin Caleb. Caleb, holding court at the head of the table, was in rare form. He theatrically flashed a new watch, a gleaming Patek Philippe. "Dad got it for me as an early Christmas gift," he announced to the room, though his eyes were fixed on me. "A little something to celebrate my big promotion." My Aunt Carol beamed, clasping her hands together. "Our Caleb is the new Director of Strategic Initiatives. It's a very important role with a great deal of responsibility." I knew for a fact, through the family grapevine, that Director of Strategic Initiatives was a made-up title Uncle Richard had invented after Caleb had botched a major project. It was a promotion in name only, a way to give him a bigger office and a higher salary without him having to touch anything important. But I just smiled, spooning some mashed potatoes onto my plate. "Congratulations, Caleb. That's fantastic news." He gave me a lazy, dismissive glance, the kind you'd give a waiter. "Thanks, Arthur. How's whatever it is you do with computers going? Still playing in that little sandbox with your friends?" "It's going well, thanks," I said, keeping my voice even. The evening droned on like that. A highlight reel of Caleb's recent vacation to Monaco, a long-winded complaint from Uncle Richard about capital gains taxes, and Aunt Carol's subtle but persistent digs at my parents' modest lifestyle. I was just mentally counting down the minutes until I could make a polite escape when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A force of habit from years of being on call for work, I pulled it out. It was an email from my financial advisor, a notification about a potential investment opportunity one was considering. The banner preview on my lock screen was brief, but it contained a few key numbers. Before I could dismiss it, a shadow fell over me. It was Caleb, shamelessly leaning over my shoulder. "Ooh, playing the stock market, are we, cousin?" he sneered, his voice laced with amusement. "Don't lose your whole salary on a bad tip." "What's that, a $2,000 investment?" His eyes narrowed, trying to read the text. My heart hammered against my ribs. My thumb fumbled as I tried to lock the screen, but I wasn't fast enough. His smirk vanished, melting away into a look of utter confusion. Then, that confusion hardened into suspicion. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "That number, it doesn't say 2,000. Says 2 million. He looked from the phone to my face, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What the hell is this, Arthur? Are you into something shady?" The clinking of silverware stopped. Every eye at the table turned to us. The trap had been sprung. And to understand the explosion that followed, to grasp why a simple number on a phone screen could detonate a family, you have to go back. You have to understand how we were built. It all began with two houses, just a 20-minute drive apart in the suburbs of Boston, but they might as well have been on different planets. My world was a blue, 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom ranch house on a street where all the houses looked more or less the same. We had a leaky faucet in the kitchen that was my dad's eternal weekend project, and a lawn that my dad and I mowed together every Saturday. My dad, David, was an electrical engineer. He worked for a large utility company, a steady, reliable job. He came home with grease under his fingernails and taught me how to fix a bicycle chain and how to check the oil in a car. He was a quiet, methodical man who believed in practicality and durability. My mom, Susan, was a second-grade teacher. She filled our house with the smell of baking bread, the rustle of books, and the sound of laughter. Our home was modest, but it was a fortress of love and support. The family mantra, the one I heard almost daily, was, "If you want something, Arthur, you work for it. Money doesn't grow on trees, but satisfaction does when you earn it yourself." Caleb's world was a 6-bedroom white colonial mansion at the end of a long, winding driveway, set back from the road as if to keep the common world at bay. It had a swimming pool that was professionally cleaned twice a week, a pristine tennis court, and a 3-car garage that housed my uncle's Mercedes, my aunt's Lexus, and whatever brand-new sports car Caleb was driving that year. My uncle Richard had inherited his father's manufacturing business. His own father had been a self-made man, but Richard had been born into wealth and wore it like a custom-tailored suit. He was a man who believed that his success was an inheritance, a birthright to be maintained and displayed. Aunt Carol's full-time job was managing the house staff and ensuring Caleb never had to experience a moment of want, a moment of struggle, or a moment of consequence. Their family mantra was simpler and unspoken. If Caleb wants it, Caleb gets it. The difference was never clearer than on our birthdays. For my 10th birthday, I got what I wanted more than anything in the world: a brand new tent for backyard camping. I had spent months poring over catalogs. My parents and I grilled hot dogs, told ghost stories by flashlight, and I fell asleep in my sleeping bag under the stars, feeling like the king of my own small kingdom. For Caleb's 10th birthday, 2 weeks later, Uncle Richard rented out an entire water park. An actual entire water park. All of his friends from his expensive private school were there, running wild. He got the newest Nintendo console with a dozen games, a dirt bike that probably cost more than my parents' car, and a mountain of other gifts. I remember standing there in my swimming trunks, holding a small, neatly wrapped gift, a book on astronomy I'd bought with my allowance money, feeling completely and utterly invisible. Aunt Carol found me by the wave pool, a tall glass of iced tea in her hand. She tousled my hair, her diamond rings cold against my scalp. "Oh, Arthur, you're so sweet for coming," she'd said, her voice dripping with the kind of pity that feels like an insult. "Don't you worry. It's important to see how the other half lives. Isn't it? It gives you something to aspire to. When you're older, maybe Caleb can give you a summer job." She thought she was being kind, encouraging even, but all I heard was, "You are less. You will always be less. You will always be someone who works for us." I was only 10, but I understood the subtext perfectly. That day, standing in the shadow of a giant water slide, smelling the chlorine and the privilege in the air, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never work for Caleb. I would never ask them for anything. I would build my own world on my own terms, stone by painful stone if I had to. High school is when the cracks between our two worlds widened into a canyon. I went to the public high school, a sprawling brick building that was loud, chaotic, and wonderfully diverse. I was a nerd and I was okay with it. I loved my computer science and physics classes. I found a home there. When I wasn't studying, I was working. My first real job was at a local coffee shop called The Daily Grind. I was a barista, working weekends and evenings, coming home smelling of espresso and burnt sugar. Every dollar I made, every tip I pocketed went into a savings account. It had a name, written neatly in my bank book, College Fund. It was my escape plan. Caleb, of course, went to Westfield Academy, a prestigious private school with a manicured lawn and a scandalous tuition fee. His work was being the captain of the lacrosse team. His savings was the trust fund his grandfather had set up for him, an ever-present safety net he never even had to think about. One time I tried to bridge the gap. The public school and Westfield had a joint science fair. I had spent months on my project, a rudimentary program that could predict weather patterns with surprising accuracy. I was proud of it. Caleb's project was a flashy volcano that erupted with baking soda and vinegar, the kind of thing you do in third grade. It had clearly been assembled by his father's secretary. He won second place. The judges, I later learned, included a board member of my uncle's company. I didn't even place. Caleb found me packing up my display. "Hey, cool computer thing," he said, not even looking at it. "Tough luck. But hey, it's all about who you know, right?" He winked and walked away, leaving me standing there with my carefully coded program and a hot, bitter taste in my mouth. The ultimate symbol of our divide, though, arrived on our 16th birthdays. I had spent 2 years saving every penny from my job at the Daily Grind. After months of scouring classified ads, I bought my first car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic with 120,000 miles on it. The paint was peeling on the hood, the air conditioning was broken, and it made a weird rattling noise when it went over 50 miles per hour, but it was mine. I had earned it. The pride I felt turning that key for the first time was immense. It was the key to my own freedom. For his 16th birthday, Caleb walked out of his front door to find a brand new, metallic blue BMW convertible parked in the driveway, a giant red bow on the hood. He posted a picture on Instagram with the caption, "Sweet 16. Guess I've been a good boy." I tried not to let it bother me. I really did. But a few months later, the universe decided to rub salt in the wound. My Honda's transmission died. I was on my way home from a late shift, and the car just gave out with a sickening clunk. The mechanic's quote was $700. It might as well have been $7 million. My parents had just paid for a new water heater, and I knew money was tight. I swallowed every ounce of my pride. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I called Caleb. "Hey, man." I started, my voice shaky. "I'm in a real bind. My car broke down. The repair is $700. I was wondering if I could possibly borrow the money. I'll pay you back with interest, I swear. I can pick up extra shifts." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear music and laughter in the background. He was at a party. "700? He said, as if the amount was trivial. "Oof, that's rough. Sorry, Art, can't help you out. I'm a little tight on cash myself right now. You know how it is." My stomach dropped. Tight on cash? That night, his Instagram story was a video of him and his friends ordering a ridiculously expensive bottle of champagne at a club in Boston. I hung up the phone, my face burning with shame and anger. I felt foolish for asking, small for needing to. I ended up calling my best friend, Maria. She didn't hesitate. "Of course," she said. "I'll transfer it to you right now. Don't even worry about paying me back right away. We'll figure it out." That was the day I learned the profound difference between having money and having character. It was a lesson Caleb would take decades to even begin to understand. And it was the absolute final time I ever considered asking him or his family for a single thing. High school graduation was the final, formal ceremony marking our separate paths into adulthood. My graduation was held at the public school's football stadium on a blistering hot June day. My parents and Maria cheered so loudly from the bleachers, I could hear them over the thousands of other people. Afterward, we had a simple barbecue in our backyard with a few family friends. My big gift was a new laptop for college and a check for $500 from my parents, a fortune they had carefully saved from my mom's summer school salary. I felt loved, supported, and ready. Caleb's graduation from Westfield Academy was a much grander affair, held in a plush, air-conditioned performing arts center. The party afterward was at a downtown country club, catered, with an open bar for the adults and a DJ. His gift? A brand new Range Rover to replace the old 1-year-old BMW. The real divergence, though, wasn't the parties or the gifts. It was our college destinations. I had worked my tail off for a 4.0 GPA. I'd taken every advanced placement class I could and poured my soul into my application essays. I was accepted into the state university's highly rated engineering program with a partial academic scholarship. It wasn't a fancy Ivy League school, but it was a great program. And with the scholarship, the money from my part-time job, and some unavoidable student loans, I could just about afford it. I was thrilled. Caleb, whose grades were mediocre at best, was heading to Princeton. I remember the day he told me. We were at some obligatory family gathering. He said it so casually, swirling ice in a glass of soda. "Yeah, legacy admission," he shrugged, as if discussing the weather. "You know how it is. Dad made some calls, wrote a hefty check for their new library fund. It's more about the connections you make there anyway, not the classes. The brand." My Uncle Richard overheard him and slapped him on the back, beaming with a pride that seemed completely disconnected from any actual achievement. He caught my eye and gave me a condescending wink. "Don't you worry, Arthur," he said, his voice booming so everyone could hear. "You work hard at your state school. A good work ethic is important for guys like you. It builds character. Who knows, maybe one day you'll end up designing a factory for Caleb after he takes over the family business." The implication was as subtle as a punch to the gut. He is destined for greatness. You are destined to work for him. Your hard work is a quaint character-building exercise. His connections are real power. It was the same message I'd been getting my whole life, just wrapped in a different, more expensive package. I didn't say anything. I just smiled a tight, polite smile. But inside, a fire was lit. It was a quiet, slow-burning fire, but it was fierce. They saw my path as a limitation, a second-best option. I saw it as my only option, and therefore, the only one that feeling completely and utterly invisible. My life was a blur of early mornings and late nights. I lived on cheap coffee and instant noodles. There was a constant, low-level hum of exhaustion under my skin. I learned to function on 5 hours of sleep, to write code in my head while bussing tables, to see every challenge not as a burden, but as a problem with a solution I just hadn't found yet. I remember one particular Tuesday night in my junior year. It was 2 a.m. I was in the university library, the only person left in the computer lab, surrounded by empty coffee cups. The air was stale, the silence broken only by the hum of the machines. I had a major coding project due the next day and a midterm in another class, and I was running on pure adrenaline. My code kept throwing back errors, a persistent bug I couldn't squash, and I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Felt hopeless. I buried my face in my hands, the thought of dropping out, of just giving up and finding an easier path, feeling dangerously tempting. Just for a moment of distraction, I let myself scroll through Instagram, and there it was, a new post from Caleb. It was a picture of him and a group of friends, all tan and smiling, on a yacht in the Caribbean. It was his fall break. The caption read, "Skipping class for a different kind of education. #YachtLife, #Princeton, #connections." Seeing that picture, at that exact moment, should have broken me. The sheer, cosmic injustice of it all, me, under the flickering fluorescent lights of a library basement, drowning in work and debt, while he was literally sailing through life on his father's dime. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I could feel the self-pity starting to creep in, a dangerous poison. But then something shifted. The despair curdled into anger, and the anger hardened into pure, unadulterated resolve. This was the game. This was the unfair, rigged, ridiculous game of life, and I had two choices. Complain about the rules or get so good that the rules didn't matter. I locked my phone. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I turned back to my computer screen, my mind suddenly clear and sharp. I saw the bug. A stupid, simple semicolon I'd been missing for hours. I fixed it. The code compiled perfectly. I finished the project at 4 a.m., slept for 2 hours in a lumpy library chair, and got an A on my midterm later that morning. That night was a turning point. I stopped comparing my journey to his. It was pointless. He was on a luxury cruise and I was in a rowboat in a storm. Complaining about the storm wouldn't get me to shore. Only rowing would. So I decided I would become the best damn rower the world had ever seen. The person who changed everything for me wasn't a wealthy benefactor or a lucky break. It was a professor named Evelyn Reed. She taught my advanced algorithms class, a course so notoriously difficult that it was considered a rite of passage for engineering students. She was brilliant, tough as nails, and had a radar for students who were coasting versus those who were genuinely hungry to learn. She saw the hunger in me. I lived in her office hours. I wasn't just asking for help with assignments. I was challenging her, debating theories, bringing her ideas that went way beyond the curriculum. I was fascinated by the potential of data visualization, how to turn massive, chaotic data sets into something beautiful and intuitive. One afternoon, after I'd spent an hour at her whiteboard sketching out a new concept, she leaned back in her chair and studied me over the rim of her glasses. "Arthur," she said, her voice crisp, "most students come in here asking how to get an A. You come in here asking how to build the future. There's a difference." She paused, then continued. "I have a friend. His name is Liam Thompson. He was one of my students years ago, a real firecracker. He started his own little software company, a startup. It's called Visu. They're trying to do something crazy with data visualization, something nobody thinks is possible. They have no money, a tiny office over a pizza place, but they have a ton of passion. I think you should meet him. They need an intern." A startup. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next day, I went to the address she gave me. It was exactly as she'd described. The air in the stairwell smelled of pepperoni and ambition. And there I met Liam. He was maybe 10 years older than me, with a relentless energy and eyes that sparkled when he talked about his company's mission. The interview wasn't an interview. It was a collaborative work session. He didn't care about my GPA, my family background, or what school I went to. He cared about how I thought. He gave me a complex problem to solve on a whiteboard, and we spent an hour debating, erasing, and rebuilding the most elegant solution. At the end of it, he grinned, wiping chalk dust on his jeans. "You're hired. I can't pay you much. In fact, I can barely pay you at all. But I can promise you'll learn more here in 3 months than you would in 3 years at some soulless corporate giant." I took the internship. It was the best decision of my life. I worked 40 hours a week at Visu on top of my classes and my weekend restaurant job. I was running on fumes, but I was inspired. I was part of a small, scrappy team trying to build something from nothing. I wasn't just a cog in a machine. I was helping to build the machine itself. Then came the moment that set my future in stone. 3 months into my internship, Liam called me into his tiny, closet-sized office. I thought I was in trouble, that maybe I'd messed something up. "Arthur," he said, pushing a piece of paper across his cluttered desk, "I've been watching you. You don't just do the work I assign you. You see problems before they happen. You come up with solutions I haven't even thought of. You're not thinking like an intern. You're thinking like an owner." He tapped the paper. It was a legal document. "This is an offer," he said, his voice serious. "It's not much because the company isn't worth much right now. But it's a small slice of equity. Stock options. I want to make your ownership official. I'm betting on this company, and Arthur, I'm betting on you." I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. Equity. Ownership. It was a language my uncle's family understood, but one I never thought would apply to me. It wasn't about my last name. It wasn't about who I knew. It was about my work, my ideas, my value. This piece of paper was more than just potential money. It was validation. It was the first brick in the foundation of the world I was trying to build for myself. Graduation came and went. For me, it was a quiet affair marked by a sigh of relief. For Caleb, it was another excuse for a lavish party where he bragged about his bright future. After that, our paths, which had been running parallel for so long, shot off in completely opposite directions, like 2 rockets aimed at different galaxies. Caleb, armed with his Princeton degree in art history, or was it communications? He'd changed it so many times, did the most predictable thing in the world. He went to work for his father. Uncle Richard gave him a corner office with a view and a fancy, meaningless title, Associate Vice President of Strategic Development. His starting salary was obscene, more than my father made after 30 years as a dedicated engineer. He spent his days in long lunches, networking on the golf course, and forwarding emails. He was playing the part of a successful executive, a hollow imitation of his father. I remember seeing him about 6 months after graduation. He was showing off a new company car. "It's all about synergy," he told me. Using a business buzzword he clearly didn't understand. "We're leveraging our assets for maximum impact." It was complete nonsense. I, on the other hand, made a choice that seemed like pure insanity to everyone in my extended family. Liam had offered me a full-time position at Visu. The salary was modest, to say the least. It was less than what my friends were making in entry-level corporate jobs at big, stable companies. But the offer also came with a significant increase in my stock options. I remember laying out the two paths in front of my parents at our small kitchen table. I could take a safe, corporate job with a good salary, health benefits, and a 401k. Practical, sensible choice. Or I could take a huge risk on a tiny startup that had a 90% chance of failing within the next 2 years. My dad, a practical man of science, looked at the numbers. He was worried. "Arthur, the salary is very low. How will you pay off your student loans? What about saving for the future?" My mom, ever the teacher, looked at me, not at the papers. "But where will you be happier?" she asked. "Where will you learn more? Where will you feel like you're building something?" I looked at them both, my two pillars of support. "I believe in what Liam is building," I said, my voice filled with a certainty that surprised even me. "I believe in the technology. It's a risk, but it feels like my risk. My chance to build something from the ground up." And that was enough for them. My dad nodded slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. "I don't know much about this tech world, son," he said. "But I do know you. If you believe in it, we believe in you." So I took the job. I moved into a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. I drove my old Honda Civic until the wheels nearly fell off. I ate ramen noodles more times than I can count. At the next family Christmas gathering, Aunt Carol pulled me aside, her face a mask of patronizing concern. "Arthur, dear," she said, patting my arm, "we're so worried about you. This little computer game company of yours, it's just a hobby, isn't it? Richard says he can always find a place for you in the mailroom at his company. It's an honest salary, good benefits. You need to think about your future." I just smiled. "Thank you for the offer, Aunt Carol, but I'm happy where I am. We're building something important." She just shook her head, a sad little smile on her face. They saw me as a failure, a misguided kid who had turned down a real job. They couldn't understand that I wasn't chasing a salary. I was chasing a dream, and while Caleb was inheriting a corner office, I was earning my place at a folding table, surrounded by brilliant, hungry people who were trying to change the world, and I wouldn't have traded places with him for anything. The next 3 years were a silent grind. There were no flashy Instagram posts from my side, no new cars, no fancy vacations. My life was the Visu office. It was a crucible. We were a tiny company, a David fighting against a dozen Goliaths. We lived and breathed code. There were moments of incredible, exhilarating breakthrough and long, dark periods of crushing defeat. I remember one winter where we were just weeks away from running out of money. The mood in the office was grim. Liam had to skip payroll for 2 weeks, promising to pay us back when, not if, we secured our next round of funding. A few people, the ones who had been in it for the paycheck, quit. The pressure was immense. We were all working 100-hour weeks, fueled by stale pizza and the sheer, desperate hope that we could pull our company back from the brink. We weren't just colleagues. We were soldiers in a trench together. During that time, I was faced with a stark choice. My old Honda Civic had finally, truly died. It wasn't a surprise. It was an inevitability. I was on the highway, and it gave out with a final, shuddering gasp. The tow truck driver looked at it and just shook his head. "Son, it's time to let her go." I had been saving up for a down payment on a slightly less ancient used car. It wasn't much, just a couple $1,000s, but it was all the savings I had in the world. It was my car fund, my ticket to not having to take 3 buses to get to work every day. At the exact same time, in a desperate move to keep the lights on, Liam offered the remaining employees a chance to buy a small amount of additional equity at a rock-bottom price. It was a Hail Mary pass, a way to inject a tiny bit of cash into the company and, more importantly, a test of faith for those of us who remained. So I had a choice. A car, a tangible thing I desperately needed to make my life easier, or a few more slivers of ownership in a company that was, by all rational measures, on the verge of collapsing. I thought about Caleb and his brand new Range Rover. I thought about how easily he could solve a problem like this, just by asking his dad. The injustice of it stung, but only for a moment. Then I thought about what we were building at Visu. I thought about the code I had written, the problems we had solved, the potential of what we were creating. I took my car savings, every last penny, and I bought the stock. I started taking the bus to work. My commute went from 30 minutes to an hour and a half each way. I missed Maria's birthday party because we had a server crisis that night. I lived on a budget so tight it squeaked. Those were the silent years, the years no one in my family saw. They just saw the old clothes, the cheap apartment, the lack of a decent car. They saw failure. They had no idea that I was forging my own success in the fire, one sacrifice at a time. I was betting on myself, and I had a feeling the payoff would be worth it. The change, when it came, wasn't a slow dawn. It was a lightning strike from a clear blue sky. We had survived that brutal winter. Our Hail Mary pass had worked. We secured a small bridge loan, and then our technology had a major breakthrough. We solved a problem that our bigger competitors couldn't, and we landed a key client. Then another. Suddenly, we had momentum. The tech world is small and word travels fast. The buzz started to spread about this tiny company called Visu that was doing revolutionary things with data visualization. We were no longer just surviving, we were thriving. One day, Liam called an all-hands meeting. There were only 12 of us in the company at that point, the core group that had weathered the storm. We crammed into our small conference room, the one with the perpetually wobbly table. He looked nervous and excited all at once, pacing back and forth. "I've been in some talks," he started, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "With a company you've all heard of, DataCorp." A murmur went through the room. DataCorp wasn't just a big company. They were a titan, a giant in the industry. It was like a little league team getting a call from the New York Yankees. "They're interested in our technology," Liam continued, a grin spreading across his face. "Very interested. They've seen what we can do, and they know they can't replicate it. So, they've made an offer to acquire us." The room fell silent. You could feel the collective intake of breath. This was the dream, the exit, the validation of all those sleepless nights, the skipped payrolls, the sacrificed weekends. "What's the offer?" someone whispered. Liam took a deep breath, savoring the moment. "The offer is $200 million. For a second, nobody moved. The number was so large, so abstract, it didn't seem real. 200 million. And then the room just erupted. We were shouting, hugging, laughing. Our tough-as-nails lead programmer, a woman who I'd never seen show an ounce of emotion, was openly weeping with joy. It was pure, unfiltered ecstasy. I just sat there, stunned, my mind racing. I did some quick, clumsy math in my head. My initial stock options, the extra shares I had bought with my car money. It couldn't be right. The number was too big. It was life-altering. Later that night, the official paperwork came through from the lawyers. I sat on the floor of my tiny apartment, the one I shared with 2 roommates who were currently arguing about whose turn it was to buy toilet paper. And I opened the email, and I saw the number, verified and legally binding. My 5% stake in the company, after everything was said and done, was worth $10.2 million. $10,200,000. I just stared at the screen. I laughed. It started as a chuckle, then grew into a full-blown, slightly hysterical laugh. Then I think I cried a little. I paid off my student loans in a single online transaction, watching a decade of debt disappear with a single click. I called my parents and told them to start planning their retirement, a conversation that ended with my dad speechless and my mom crying tears of joy. I hired a highly recommended financial advisor, a quiet, wise man named Mr. Chun, who helped me understand what this all meant. But I made one very important decision. I told no one else. Not my friends, and certainly not my extended family. As far as they were concerned, I was still just Arthur, the nerdy cousin with the dead-end job at the weird computer company. I bought a modest, comfortable condo in a quiet neighborhood, but I kept driving a simple Toyota. I didn't want their world. I didn't want their attention or their fake praise. I had earned my freedom, and that freedom included the right to be left alone. I had no idea that my secret was a ticking time bomb, and that Thanksgiving was the fuse. Which brings us back to that Thanksgiving table, the stage for the final act of this long family drama. For the first time in years, I had agreed to come. My mom had insisted. "It's family, Arthur," she'd said. "Just for a few hours. Please." So I went. I walked into that grand house, no longer intimidated by it. It was just a house. The expensive furniture was just wood and fabric. The paintings were just paint on a canvas. The power they held over me for so long was gone because I had built my own power, and it came from within, not from a bank account. I sat through the dinner, a quiet observer, a cultural anthropologist studying a strange, alien tribe. I listened to Caleb brag. He talked about his team, the people he managed. I knew from a cousin on my mom's side that he managed no one. He talked about a big deal he was closing, a deal I knew his father had arranged from start to finish. He was a man playing a role, a child in his father's oversized suit, and he didn't even seem to realize the costume didn't fit. Aunt Carol, as always, turned her particular brand of condescending attention to me. "Arthur, you're so quiet. Is everything all right? You know, it's not too late to think about a more stable career path. Your uncle and we just worry about you. A promotion is not always about money, but about stability." "I'm fine, Aunt Carol," I said with a genuine, relaxed smile. "Everything is great." My calmness, my lack of defensiveness, seemed to unsettle them more than anything else. They were used to a version of me that was insecure and easily flustered, a version they could feel superior to. That version of Arthur was gone, and they didn't know what to do with this new one. Then came the buzz from my phone. The email from Mr. Chun about the $2 million angel investment I was considering making in a new education startup run by a brilliant young woman. When Caleb leaned over, it was a pure power move, a physical manifestation of his lifelong habit of looking down on me. He was invading my space, trying to call me out, to expose me as a wannabe, a small-timer playing with money he didn't have. "Ooh, playing the stock market, are we, cousin?" he sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, a performance for the rest of the table. "Don't lose your whole salary on a bad tip. What's that, a $2,000 investment? Be careful, little guy." I tried to lock my phone, but my hands were suddenly clumsy. He saw it. His eyes, which had been lazy and arrogant, sharpened like a hawk's. The smirk on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine curiosity. He was like a dog who had caught an interesting scent. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice dropping. He squinted at the screen, his head tilted. "That number, it doesn't say 2,000. Says 2 million. He physically recoiled for a second, then leaned back in, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked from the phone to me, his brain trying to process an equation that made no sense in his neatly ordered world. Arthur, the poor cousin, and the number 2 million did not belong in the same sentence. It was a glitch in the matrix of his reality. "What the hell is this, Arthur?" he demanded, his voice no longer playful, but sharp and accusatory. "Are you into something shady? Did you get a loan? What is going on?" The table fell silent. My Uncle Richard put down his wineglass, his eyes like steel chips. My mom looked at me with worried eyes. My dad just watched, his expression completely unreadable. Caleb wasn't asking a question. It was an interrogation, an accusation that I had somehow broken the unspoken rules of the family hierarchy, that I had cheated at a game he didn't even know I was playing. "It's a business email, Caleb," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I finally managed to lock my phone and put it face down on the table, a small, symbolic gesture of privacy that was already too late. "Business email?" he scoffed, his voice rising, cracking with a strange mix of anger and panic. $2 million? What kind of business are you in, Arthur? Did you win the lottery? Are you dealing drugs? Uncle Richard leaned forward, his authority filling the space. "What's he talking about, Arthur? Answer the question." I looked around the table, at my aunt's confused face, my uncle's suspicious glare, my mother's anxious frown. Then I looked at my dad. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at his brother, Richard. And for the first time, I saw not just quiet strength, but a flicker of defiance in his eyes. He gave me the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It meant it's okay. The game is over. Tell them. I took a deep breath, the air in the room suddenly feeling thin. "The company I've been working for, Visu," I said, keeping my voice steady and directing my words to the whole table, not just Caleb. "We were acquired by Datacorp a few months ago. I was an early partner. I had equity." Caleb just stared at me blankly. The word equity didn't seem to compute. It was a concept for people like his father, not for people like me. "So, what does that mean? Your boss gave you a nice bonus?" He sneered, trying to regain control, to put me back in my box. "What, 100 grand? Good for you." "No," I said simply. "My shares were worth about $10 million. The words hung in the air, heavy and solid. For a full 5 seconds there was absolute ringing silence. You could have heard a pin drop. The only sound was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, marking the seconds of their disbelief. Then Caleb's face, which had been pale with confusion, turned a dark, blotchy red. A vein started to throb on his temple. "10 million?" he stammered, the words catching in his throat. You're lying. You have to be lying." "Why would I lie about that, Caleb?" And that's when he broke. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was a snap, a complete and utter psychological implosion. He lunged to his feet, his chair screeching back against the hardwood floor. His fist came down on the table with a deafening bang, and the crystal glasses jumped. "Liar!" he roared, his voice shaking with a fury that was completely unhinged. "You've been sitting there, all quiet and pathetic for years, judging us, looking down on us. When you had all that money the whole time." He started pacing behind his chair, a caged animal, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair and messing it up. "All those years, you acted like you were better than us because you were working hard. Mr. Humble, driving that piece of crap car, living in that dump. It was all an act. You were laughing at us. You let us feel sorry for you." Aunt Carol burst into tears, the dramatic, heaving sobs of a victim. "How could you?" she wailed, pointing a trembling finger at my parents. You knew, and you let us feel sorry for him. You always made us feel like we were terrible people for giving our son the advantages he deserved." Caleb then turned his rage on me, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "You think you're better than me? You think that money makes you better than me?" With a guttural scream that seemed to come from his very soul, he swept his arm across the table. Plates of turkey, bowls of cranberry sauce, glasses of expensive wine, and my aunt's prized porcelain gravy boat went flying, shattering against the far wall in a sickening, chaotic crash. The room was in chaos. My aunt was wailing. My uncle was on his feet, shouting, "Caleb, for God's sake, stop it." Through it all, my father had remained silent. Now he slowly stood up. He wasn't a large man, my dad, but in that moment he seemed to fill the entire room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He looked directly at Caleb, whose chest was heaving, his face slick with sweat and rage. And he said the sentence that I will never, ever forget. "He is better than you, Caleb?" my father said, his voice quiet, clear, and absolutely devastating. "And it has nothing to do with his money." The silence that followed was more profound, more shocking, than the noise that came before it. Caleb just stared, his mouth hanging open, all the fight, all the rage, all the bluster draining out of him, leaving behind a hollow, broken shell of a man. I stood up. I looked at the wreckage of the dinner, at the faces of my family, distorted by shock and rage. I had nothing left to prove to them. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their respect, and I finally realized I didn't need it. I never did. "I earned every single dollar I have," I said to the room, "and I earned it by myself." Then I turned around and walked out the door, leaving them in the ruins of their perfect dinner and their shattered illusions. This is the moment that changed everything, the moment I finally took back control of my own story. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You're amazing. If this moment resonated with you, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below, just so I know you made it this far with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone else. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The drive home was a blur. The crisp November air felt good on my face through the open window, clearing my head. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but inside, I was a cocktail of conflicting emotions. There was a profound sense of relief, the feeling of a pressure valve being released after a lifetime of being held down. There was sadness, too, a deep, aching sadness for the family I wished I had, the one that might have celebrated my success instead of being shattered by it. But overwhelming everything else, there was a feeling of profound, unshakable freedom. I had walked out of that house, but I had also walked out of the role they had assigned me my entire life. The poor, pitiable, hard-working cousin. That character was dead, and I didn't mourn him. I had finally been able to speak my truth not as a defense, but as a simple statement of fact. When I got back to my condo, the silence was a welcome comfort. I stood in the middle of my living room and just breathed. It was over. The secret was out and I had survived. My phone buzzed. It was my mom. I braced myself for a lecture, for a plea to go back and apologize, to smooth things over for the sake of family. It's what she had always preached. But that's not what she said. "Arthur, are you okay?" Her voice was filled with a fierce concern, not disappointment. "I'm okay, Mom. Really. I'm better than okay. I am so sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We should have left with you. Your father and I are on our way home now. I want you to know we are so proud of you. Do you hear me? Not because of the money. We're proud of the man you've become." Tears pricked my eyes. "I hear you, Mom. Thanks. That means a lot. And your father?" she added, a note of wonder in her voice. "I have never seen him speak like that to his brother. Ever. He's furious. But he's proud." A few minutes later, another call came through. It was Maria. "Okay," she said, without even saying hello. "Your mom just called my mom. The family emergency phone tree is in full effect. I need the whole story. Start from the beginning. And please tell me you threw a turkey at him." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that came from my gut. No turkey throwing, sorry to disappoint, but a gravy boat was a casualty. I told her everything, from the moment Caleb leaned over my shoulder to the moment I walked out the door. She listened, interjecting with gasps and, "I knew it!" And that entitled jerk finally got what he deserved. Talking to her, recounting the events, made them feel real. It solidified the fact that I had done the right thing. Hanging up, I realized I wasn't alone. I had my own family, the one I had chosen and the one that had chosen me back. My parents, who valued character over cash. My best friend, who had lent me her last dollars when my millionaire cousin wouldn't spot me a dime. That was my true wealth. The $10 million in the bank was just a tool, a consequence of the work. The real fortune was the people who had loved me when I had nothing, and who were still there to cheer for me now. I expected the days after Thanksgiving to be filled with angry phone calls, bitter text messages, maybe even a formal disowning. But there was only silence. A deep, deafening silence from my uncle's side of the family. It was as if a wall of ice had gone up. I was fine with it. I needed the space to process, to adjust to my new reality where I no longer had to hide. Then, a week later, an unknown number called my phone. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Arthur. The voice was timid, shaky, and waterlogged with tears. It was my Aunt Carol. "Hello, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice neutral, guarded. There was a sob on the other end of the line. "Arthur, I am so sorry," she wept. What I said. What happened? There is no excuse. I was horrible, but I want to try to explain. Not for you. For me. I need to say it. I listened, skeptical but curious. "You have to understand," she said between sobs. "Your parents, they were always so perfect. They didn't have a lot of money, but they had happiness. They had a marriage that was a real partnership. They had a son who was smart and kind and who they were so obviously proud of. And I looked at my life with all this money and this big, empty house, and a husband who was always working or golfing. And I was so deeply insecure. I felt like I had to give Caleb everything, all the material things, to make up for what I thought we were lacking. I was trying to compete with your mother. It was ugly and it was wrong, and in the process I turned my son into a monster who reflects all my worst qualities. I'm so sorry." It was the most honest, self-aware thing I had ever heard her say. It didn't excuse decades of her behavior, the subtle digs, the patronizing comments, but for the first time, I understood the motivation behind it. It wasn't about hating me. It was about her hating her own life. She wasn't just a villain in my story. She was the tragic hero of her own. For the first time, I felt a sliver of pity for her. "Thank you for telling me that, Aunt Carol," I said, and I meant it. I appreciate the honesty. A few days after that, Uncle Richard called. His apology was what I expected. Stiff, awkward, and smelling of legal advice. He was sorry for the unfortunate incident and for Caleb's unacceptable behavior. He talked about the property damage. He didn't talk about the emotional damage he had inflicted for 30 years. I cut him off mid-sentence. "Uncle Richard," I said, my voice calm and clear, "I don't need an apology for a broken plate. The damage was done long before that dinner. I just need respect. And if you can't give me that, as your nephew and as a man who has made his own way, then we don't have anything more to talk about." I set my boundary. I drew a line in the sand. For the first time in my life, I was the one dictating the terms of our relationship. The power had well and truly shifted, and it had nothing to do with money. It had to do with self-respect. The year that followed was one of quiet construction. Not of wealth, but of a life. I had the money now to do anything, to be anything. I could have bought a mansion bigger than my uncle's. I could have bought a fleet of sports cars and spent my days on a yacht just like Caleb used to. For a week, the thought was tempting. I could have become them, but the idea left a sour taste in my mouth. What was the point of my entire journey if I just ended up at their destination? So I started with what mattered. The first thing I did was help my parents. I paid off their mortgage and set up a retirement fund that would ensure they would be comfortable and secure for the rest of their lives. I will never forget the look on my father's face when he realized he could finally retire and build the woodworking shop he had always dreamed of. It was a look of pure, unburdened joy. That was a better return on investment than any stock I could have bought. Then I thought about my own journey. I thought about that night in the library, feeling hopeless and alone. I thought about the rattling old Honda that represented both my shame and my pride. I thought about how Professor Reed's belief in me had opened a door that had seemed permanently locked. And I thought about how many other kids there were out there just like me. Kids with brains and drive and a fire in their belly, but without the resources or connections to get their first break. I met with Mr. Chun, my financial advisor. I told him I didn't want to just preserve my wealth. I wanted to use it. Wealth is a responsibility, he told me, not a privilege. So, I worked with Mr. Chun and a team of lawyers to establish a foundation. It took months of paperwork and planning. I endowed it with $2 million of my own money. We called it the First Generation Scholarship, and its mission was simple: to provide full-ride scholarships for first-generation college students pursuing degrees in science and technology at public universities across the country. One afternoon, a few months after the program launched, a thick packet arrived at my condo. It was from the foundation. Inside were the profiles of the first 5 scholarship recipients. I sat down and read them one by one. There was a young woman from rural Ohio who wanted to be a civil engineer to build better infrastructure for her town. A young man from the Bronx who had taught himself to code on a library computer. And the first letter I read was from a young man whose story felt like it had been lifted from my own life. He wrote about growing up in a low-income household, about working 2 jobs in high school to help his family pay the rent, about his dream of becoming a software engineer. He wrote, "This scholarship isn't just about the money. It's about someone out there believing in me. It means I'm not invisible." Reading his letter, I felt a sense of purpose and joy that was deeper and more profound than anything I had ever felt closing a deal or watching my bank account grow. This was my legacy. Not the money, but what the money could do. It was about turning my own struggles into someone else's opportunity. It was about building more ladders for other people to climb, instead of just enjoying the view from the top of my own. About a year after the Thanksgiving blow-up, I got an invitation to a cousin's wedding. On my mom's side of the family this time, a neutral territory. I knew Uncle Richard, Aunt Carol, and Caleb would be there. My first instinct was to RSVP no, to avoid the drama, the awkwardness. But then I realized I wasn't the one who needed to hide. I had nothing to be ashamed of, so I went. The reception was a tense dance of avoidance. My aunt and uncle gave me polite, distant nods from across the room. I gave them the same in return, a silent, mutual agreement to coexist. But then, as I was standing by the bar, nursing a glass of water, a figure approached me. It was Caleb. He looked completely different. He had lost some weight. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost heavy nervousness. He wasn't wearing a flashy watch or a designer suit. He just looked like a normal guy. "Arthur," he said, his voice quiet, and he had to clear his throat. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I nodded, and we stepped out onto a quiet terrace overlooking a garden, away from the music and the chatter. For a long moment he just stared at his shoes, struggling to find the words. "I wanted to apologize," he said finally, forcing himself to look me in the eye. For everything. For my entire life. That night at Thanksgiving. When I saw you and I heard what you had accomplished, it didn't just make me angry. Terrified me. I just listened, not saying a word, giving him the space to say what he needed to say. "My whole life," he continued, his voice raw with an honesty I'd never heard from him before. "I was told I was the golden boy. I had the best of everything. I went to the best schools. I had the best job waiting for me, but I never actually earned any of it. It was all a gift, a prop in the stage play of my life. And when I saw that you had built this incredible success from nothing, from absolute scratch, it was like looking in a mirror and realizing I was a complete fraud. A ghost. I wasn't mad at you, Arthur. I was mad at myself for being nothing." He took a deep, shaky breath. "I left my dad's company a few months after that night. We had a huge fight. I told him I couldn't live like that anymore. He told me I was a disappointment. It was ugly, but necessary. I'm working now as an entry-level sales associate at a small tech firm downtown. I make a tiny base salary plus commission. Most days I get rejected a lot. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's humbling." He gave a small, wry smile. "Turns out starting over is harder than starting from scratch. Who knew?" He stuck out his hand. It was trembling slightly. "I know I don't deserve it, and I know it'll take time, but I hope that one day, we can actually be cousins again. I looked at him. I saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. I saw a man who had been forced to confront his own emptiness and was finally, painstakingly, trying to build something real, something of his own. The anger I had held onto for so long just dissolved. It was like putting down a heavy weight I didn't even realize I was still carrying. I shook his hand. It was a firm, solid handshake. "I'd like that, Caleb," I said. "I really would." It wasn't a magic fix. It wasn't the end of the story. But it was a new beginning. It was a bridge being built over the canyon that had separated us for so long, one honest word at a time. Life is funny. You spend so much of it chasing things you're told you should want. A better job title, a bigger house, a nicer car. You think that's the scoreboard. You think that's how you know you're winning. For 20 years, I thought the game was Arthur versus Caleb. And my goal was just to prove I was worthy of being on the same field as him. I was so focused on their definition of success that I almost missed out on creating my own. But the truth is, I was playing the wrong game all along. The real scoreboard isn't about what you have. It's about who you are. The money is nice, don't get me wrong. It gives you freedom. It gives you security. It allows you to fix problems and create opportunities. But it's not the prize. It's just a byproduct. The real prize is the character you build when you have nothing. It's the resilience you learn when you fail and get back up again. It's the empathy you feel for others who are still on their climb. It's the value of a parent's pride and a true friend's unwavering loyalty. My relationship with Caleb is better now. It's not perfect. There's still a lot of history there, a lot of scar tissue. But it's real. We meet for coffee sometimes. He tells me about his sales calls, his small victories, his frustrating defeats. I listen. For the first time, he's building something of his own, and I'm proud of him for that. He's learning the lessons I learned in my 20s, but he's learning them. That's what matters. I still live a relatively simple life. My greatest joy comes from reading the update letters from my scholarship students. I see myself in their stories, in their ambition, in their hope. I realize that the most valuable thing I own isn't a stock portfolio or a condo. It's my story, and the ability to use it to help someone else start theirs. The things we have to fight the hardest for, the things that are forged in fire and pressure and sacrifice, those become the foundations of our lives that can never be taken away. That is true wealth. It's the only kind that really matters. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. We all have our own struggles, our own Calebs, in our lives. Have you ever been in a situation where you finally had to stand up and claim your own worth? I'd be honored if you'd share your thoughts or your own story in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. Thank you.